5 family members sat down for a peaceful Sunday meal, but they could never have imagined that, by the next morning, 4 of those souls would be fighting for their very lives. What dark disaster struck that dinner table, and why did the only one to walk away, untouched, prepare the meal? I am Lord Samwell, and this is the Mushroom Masquerade case. On July 29th of 2023, in a small Australian town of Leongatha, Victoria, Erin Pattinson was hosting what was supposed to be a royal truce, an attempt to reconcile with her estranged in-laws. I mean, you invite family over to smooth things out, right? But this wasn't a casual drop-in. This was an effort to mend a relationship that had been deeply scarred by Erin's separation from her husband. The air, despite the warmth of the home, was probably thick with unspoken tension, hovering just beneath the surface of polite conversation. And the guests. It was Gail and Don Pattinson, her former mother and father-in-law, both highly respected elders of the local church community, the bedrock of the town. And joining them was Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and her husband Ian. So 5 people sat down for this family meal, each carrying the weight of the family rift. So, for a few hours, they put their grievances aside and focused on the counterpiece. An elaborate homemade beef Wellington. This wasn't a rushed meal, it was a dish demanding hours of meticulous preparation. The pastry was golden, the beef tender, and the filling, a mixture of herbs, spices and finely chopped mushrooms, was nested perfectly inside. Erin served it up herself. The scene was one of perfect domestic tranquility. The conversation, as reported later, focused on simple things: church, local news and family updates. There was no argument, no shouting, nothing to signal the utter devastation that was already brewing beneath the crust of that golden pastry. Later, witnesses would strain to remember any change in Erin's expression, any subtle shift in her voice, but she remained the picture of the glorious, attentive hostess throughout the meal. The sheer normalcy of the occasion would later become one of the case's most disturbing details. But there's another thing to note. Erin's estranged husband, Simon Pattinson, the son of Don and Gail, was also invited, but he suspiciously cancelled at the last minute. And trust me, when we get to his story later, you will see why. So the guests left the table feeling nothing but awkwardness. But within hours, the first hints of trouble began to surface. It started subtly, almost innocuously, with the familiar feeling of indigestion and a passing stomach bug. And by the time late evening rolled around, these symptoms had become terrifying. What started as nausea quickly escalated into violent, relentless vomiting, excruciating abdominal pain, and persistent watery diarrhea. The victims were losing fluids and vital electrolytes at an alarming rate, plunging them deep into dehydration and extreme weakness. The sheer volume and consistency of the symptoms, all 4 adults falling ill within the same tight time frame, is what alerted doctors, and this was beyond routine illness. So by the next morning, less than 15 hours after the meal, all 4 guests were in critical distress and rushed to separate hospitals. Doctors, seeing the severe and rapid degradation of their livers, immediately suspected this was no ordinary food poisoning. The doctors faced a horrific scenario. They observed rapid and catastrophic failure of multiple organ systems. Specifically, their livers were deteriorating at an unprecedented speed. Liver enzymes were spiking to astronomical levels, a sure sign that a primary filtration organ was being systematically destroyed. This was no ordinary infection. This was a targeted attack at the cellular level, and the medical teams quickly alerted authorities. This was officially a potential crime, and the grim identity of the poison was soon confirmed. Forensic analysis of the victims confirmed they had ingested Amanita phalloides, the death cab mushroom. This mushroom contains powerful toxins called amatoxins. Let me explain just how deadly this is. The poison of the death cab mushroom is made of tiny killers called amatoxins. When these toxins hit the liver, they don't just damage the cells, they actively shut down the factory inside each liver cell. The victims were being poisoned from the inside out. A single mushroom is enough to end the life of an adult, and within days, 3 of the guests tragically passed away due to multiple organ failures: Gail Pattinson, Don Pattinson, and Heather Wilkinson. The surviving guest, Ian Wilkinson, fought for his life for weeks, but eventually pulled through, marked forever by the ordeal. The beef Wellington had been laced with enough of this toxin to guarantee the outcome. So, with 3 individuals now deceased and 1 fighting for life, Victoria Police dispatched a massive team of investigators to the Leongatha home. This quiet suburban house instantly transformed into a high-stakes crime scene. And the first thing that made them pause was the strange and highly contrasting behavior of the hostess, Erin Pattinson. While the families of the victims were consumed with grief and hysteria, Erin remained notably composed. She offered her statements, insisting the poisoning must have been a tragic accident. Police detected subtle inconsistencies in her account of the meal and her surprisingly detached demeanor as her former in-laws fought for their existence. This psychological detail, the stillness of her face of calamity, was unnerving to seasoned detectives. But the most telling tale, a seemingly innocuous domestic observation, instantly gained significance. The guests had all eaten the beef Wellington and shared the side dishes, yet the host, Erin Pattinson, had used a separate, distinctively coloured dish for her meal. The investigation revealed she had served herself a different variation of the meal, possibly consuming less or none of the mushroom-laced filling. This detail moved the case immediately away from mere tragic food handling error and into the realm of deliberate calculation and intentional harm. Why would the chef of a large shared dish deliberately separate her own portion unless she knew something the others did not? The defense later argued this was just a simple preference, but for police it became the first tangible piece of evidence suggesting pre-knowledge. This observation, combined with the extreme potency of the poison, formed the devastating theory that would drive the entire investigation forward. The host knew exactly what she was serving, so the initial questions that would haunt the investigation were now focused squarely on the host. Was it carelessness or something far darker? And what would the evidence ultimately reveal about the person who had prepared that dangerous meal? So, with physical evidence limited, the police pivoted aggressively to digital forensics. They confiscated Erin Pattinson's phone, laptop, and all associated digital devices. The data recovered began painting a dark, meticulous picture that directly contradicted her story of a tragic mistake. Investigators found detailed timestamped searches on how to identify, prepare, and safely handle poisonous fungi, specifically the death cab mushroom. The searches were not casual, they were frequent and detailed, suggesting a growing, almost obsessive knowledge that went far beyond casual cooking curiosity. The frequency of these searches over time, not just in the days leading up to the lunch, suggested an established interest in the dark arts of mycology. And they found more. They recovered deleted photographs from her devices, showing mushrooms being weighed, labeled, and dried. All activities that suggested prior collection and processing of the fungi. The timestamps placed these activities in the crucial weeks leading up to the July lunch, long before the event itself. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake. This was a deliberate preparation for intended harm. But the evidence of premeditation was compounded by the evidence of post meditation, a clear attempt to cover her tracks. And another thing to note, investigators traced the purchase and subsequent disposal of the specific kitchen appliance, a food dehydrator. This was a common tool for preserving large batches of collected mushrooms. CCTV captured Erin carrying this device to the local transfer waste station just days after the lunch, insisting she had no idea of the danger within, effectively trying to conceal key evidence. So police recovered the device and, after meticulous forensic work, found remnants of the death cap inside, cementing yet another physical connection between her, the deadly poison, and the attempt to hide her actions. This discovery, the physical evidence inside the discarded appliance, was a hammer blow to her defense. And finally, detectives also found records showing that Erin Pattinson had intentionally factory reset her mobile phone immediately after the poisoning incident. The deliberate erasure of digital history, coupled with conflicting statements to police and the damning search history, made it clear the hostess of the deadly feast was concealing something vast and terrible. This digital trail proved that her actions after poisoning were not driven by panic, but by a deliberate strategy to destroy the damning records of her research. But what truly cemented the theory of calculated intentional harm was not just the digital evidence, but a chilling historical pattern that detectives uncovered. This July lunch wasn't the first time someone had fallen mysteriously ill after eating food prepared by the host. And furthermore, the prosecution revealed the true, chilling pretext for the gathering. This invitation was not a simple attempt at reconciliation, but a deliberate lure. Erin Pattinson had fabricated a story that she had a life-threatening illness, a cancer diagnosis, and needed the family's help to discuss how to break the news to her children. This lie, presented by the Crown as a calculated deception, served two purposes. It created a reason for an otherwise unusual family gathering, and it ensured her own children were deliberately absent from the table, guaranteeing they would not be present to ingest the poison. And here is where the story of Simon Pattinson, the estranged husband who cancelled the meal, becomes terrifyingly clear. Simon had experienced multiple severe medical episodes after consuming Erin's cooking, ingredients that at the time were medically inexplainable. We're talking about two major events spanning 2 years. In November of 2021, Simon fell critically ill after a pasta bolognese prepared by Erin. Doctors later told the court that he would likely have perished, even with immediate emergency intervention. The symptoms were consistent with a non-lethal yet powerful poisoning agent. The sheer proximity of this illness to a dish prepared by Erin became a major red flag in hindsight. Then, in September of 2022, the pattern repeated. A simple vegetable wrap sent him into a dangerous spiral of paralysis, extreme weakness, and slurred speech, again requiring urgent medical attention. At the time, doctors were puzzled, unable to identify the cause, chalking it up to a series of incredible misfortunes. The police later analysed these hospital records, comparing the vague symptoms from 2021 and 2022 with the devastating certainty of the 2023 lunch. So, viewed now in the context of the disastrous July lunch, these earlier events took on a dark, disturbing significance. They were not misfortunes, they were failed attempts at causing grave harm. The prior episodes of poisoning created by a chilling profile of the host, one capable of repeated, calculated domestic violence through covert means. The timing of Simon's absence was, quite literally, the only thing that ensured his survival. And as investigators delved deeper into the relationship, a motive began to crystallize. The Pattinsons were attempting to reconcile with Erin, but the dynamics were fragile. For investigators, the answer was becoming horrifyingly clear. This was not an accident, but the culmination of a deadly pattern. So, by the time all the evidence was gathered, the picture was conclusive. 3 individuals had succumbed to the poison: Gail Pattinson, Dawn Pattinson, and Heather Wilkinson. Ian Wilkinson, the sole survivor, had endured weeks of agonizing treatment. And in November of 2023, Erin Pattinson was formally arrested and charged with 3 felony accounts of causing death and 1 felony account of attempted grievous bodily harm. Her trial began in Morwell on April 29th of 2025 and lasted 9 grueling weeks. So the courtroom drama centered on one singular question: was the death cap mushroom delivered by accident or design? Erin Pattinson took the stand, maintaining her composure and her innocence. She claimed the poisonous mushrooms had ended up in the beef Wellington by mistake. But the prosecution systematically dismantled her defense. The digital searches, the evidence of the dehydrator, the separate plates, and the chilling pattern of near-fatal poisonings surrounded by her estranged husband. The defense's core argument rested entirely on the concept of circumstantial evidence, that no direct witness saw Erin add the poison. They insisted that all the evidence, from the searches to the cancelled phone, would be interpreted as the actions of a panicked, clumsy amateur chef who, through terrible misfortune, accidentally served a toxic dish. Prosecutors argued that the sheer combination of circumstantial evidence, the mosaic of deceit, as they termed it, left no room for reasonable doubt. They detailed how Erin had used the reconciliation lunch as a lure, added the lethal doses to the meal, and then attempted to conceal her actions. The defense insisted the individual pieces of evidence were insufficient. After 6 days of exhausting summing up, the jury, burdened by the gravity of the case, deliberated for 6.5 days. The quiet tension in the courtroom during this time was palpable, and on July 7 of 2025, they returned with their verdict: guilty on all 4 accounts. The composure Erin Pattinson had maintained for years finally cracked under the weight of the moment. The judge, Justice Bale, delivered the sentence on September 8th of 2025, life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 33 years. The court was told that Erin would not be eligible for release until she was 81. Justice Bale described the crime as a profound betrayal of trust, leaving ripples of devastation across both families and the entire community. So, the trial concluded, but the ripples of that lunch stretched far beyond the courtroom. Erin Pattinson was taken to the Dame Phyllis Forest Centre, a maximum security prison in Western Melbourne, largely isolated for her own protection. The small town of Leongatha found itself forever haunted by whispers, memories, and a lingering disbelief. The sheer scale of the deception hidden within such a mundane, domestic setting continues to challenge the community's sense of security, and the legal implications of the case are massive. It demonstrated the power of digital forensics in proving intent to cause harm, especially in poisoning cases where direct physical evidence can be limited. The fact that the court convicted her largely on the strength of her digital footprint, her behaviors, and the historical pattern of her actions serves as a powerful testament to the modern era of investigation. And for the surviving guest, Ian Wilkinson, his story is one of profound resilience. Recovery was slow and painful, requiring weeks of hospitalization, yet he displayed remarkable grace. He offered a message of forgiveness, urging reflection over vengeance. Quoted, "I only feel half alive without them," he said of his lost family, "but I encourage Erin to use her time wisely, to become a better person." His words, gentle and extraordinary, became the counterpoint to the calculated cruelty of the crime, a final act of decency in the face of absolute betrayal. And for myself, this tale is both fascinating and chilling. Good heavens, even a simple dining room, darkness can hide behind the polite facades of ordinary life. It is the story of how a small deliberate choice, a deadly mushroom in a golden crust, unraveled an entire life and brought sorrow to a peaceful Australian town.